right, welcome everyone to our latest Lunch and Learn in our Lunch and Learn series. We have Jennifer Haughey here from Easterseals Midwest. She is the family navigator for autism services. And she's going to be speaking about obtaining that autism diagnosis and just kind of maximizing some of those services with your loved one with Down syndrome and what they receive or what they could potentially receive.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I want to start just by saying two things. I literally just got home from meeting my grandson for the first time. So I'm a little on a little high and a little distracted. I will try to focus. And two, I am definitely not an expert on Down syndrome. I have worked with kids on the autism spectrum for over 30 years and their families. But I did run a support group for the dual diagnosis parents of kiddos who are dually diagnosed. It seems like right now there's about a 16% incident rate of dual diagnosis. And it is, higher in males and females, same as autism. That's, autism is higher, about a 4-to-1 ratio of males to females. I think there's a whole lot more. We're diagnosing a whole lot more girls now than we have been in the past, and I think we're finally getting a handle on what that looks like, because it does present a little differently in females. So it's probably gonna bring that ratio down a little bit, but still definitely more boys than girls. And what I've kind of noticed is that parents of kids with Down syndrome tend to notice differences somewhere around 3 to 5 years old, but they're not diagnosed until 4 or more years later. I know when I was doing my support group that the families were saying, they didn't get diagnosed until they were in middle school or high school with the autism piece. And I think that's just so common because everybody sees the Down syndrome right away. That's the easier thing to notice, to get diagnosed. And I think that everybody sort of stops there, well, that just must explain everything. Where parents typically are saying, well, but my kiddo with Down syndrome isn't acting like all these other kiddos with Down syndrome. I know one of the parents in the support group had told me that, when they really knew for sure, they had kind of suspected or whatever, but they were at a Christmas party at the Down Syndrome Association, and all the kids with Down syndrome were going to Santa and playing together, and her kiddo wanted nothing to do with Santa, nothing to do with the other kids in the room, all, wanted to be by themselves, whatever. And she's like, this is not just Down syndrome, so yeah, so I think a lot of times it's convincing the doctors, convincing the specialists to look further. So the only risk factors that I could find that seem to be at all, like I said, there's not a lot of research out there. Just with same as in autism, there seems to be maybe some genetic link. So if there is a family member with autism, there might be a little higher risk factor for you. The other one thing that I just saw was infantile spasms, which is a type of seizure. Apparently that tends to be a little higher in kids with dual diagnosis. But I don't honestly know a ton more about it than that. So in terms of things to look for, if you will, things that we see more in kids with the dual diagnosis than in only Down syndrome. A lot of times is the big one is the stereotypic behavior, the hand flapping, the stimming, a lot of the sensory kind of behaviors, perseverative behaviors where they're staring at the ceiling fans, or they're playing with the same toy in the same way over and over and over again. They'll only play with this type of toy, that kind of thing. And I think the hard thing too is just most kids with Down syndrome do have those kind of behaviors. A lot of them do. But what we find is is with the dual diagnosis, it's more often, it's more complex, and it's harder to redirect. So, with a kiddo on with just Down syndrome, they might be doing some sensory kind of, behavior or whatever, but they're more easily redirected than a kiddo with autism would be. Or maybe they're just doing it to the exclusion of other things. That's the autism piece, is when they really do those things to the exclusion of other things. And I think that's why it's so difficult, because, a lot of these behavior kind of things do overlap a bit. Abnormal play, that's the other thing. These social skills and play skills are the other area that I feel like that's where parents often say are the biggest kind of, like I said, Christmas party, and they don't want to be playing with the other kids. They don't want to be playing with Santa. They don't want to, they're focused on lining the toys up, or, I just want to parallel play, but I don't really want to interact with those. Or maybe limited pretend play kinds of things. Just not as interested in socializing. Maybe don't imitate as well. So, and less joint attention. And so joint attention is when you use your eye contact to get somebody's attention and then be like, look at that over there. Like, that kind of thing. Like, oh. And you're looking back and forth between another person and something that you want them to join at, looking with you. And with kids on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, joint attention is one of those things we just don't see a lot of. And so I think that's a big piece, or a big kind of red flag, if you will, if you've got a kiddo with Down syndrome who's not giving a lot of eye contact, not giving a lot of that joint attention, like I'm going to look at you and try to get you to look with me at something. Again, a lot of times those kids with dual diagnosis are still more social than kids with only autism, but still maybe not as social as a lot of kids with Down syndrome typically would be. So I feel like that's kind of the key here, is it's just a little bit more in those cases. So when I was I'm just thinking about this, when I was getting trained to do the ADOS, which is diagnostic tool to diagnose autism, they showed us a video, and I thought it was really, really interesting regarding like social emotional kinds of things. So one thing that we do with the itty bitties is like, you might kind of act like you're hurt, or act like something's wrong, or like you're sad or crying, to see what the response would be. And they did this with like a child with autism. They did it with a child with Down syndrome, and they did it with a child without any diagnoses. And the child with autism just totally, kept playing with the toy or whatever. And the kiddo with Down syndrome was kind of immediately like in that person's face and looking like, even if he didn't have the language to ask or to, what's wrong or whatever, very obvious that he was very concerned. So that's something else I think, with autism, you just don't always see that reciprocal connection, if you will, in terms of that social emotional piece. Language delay, again, a lot of kids with Down syndrome have difficulty maybe speaking. But I was watching, and kind of prepping for this, I watched a lot of videos of children with Down syndrome, children with dual diagnoses and things. And it just seemed like whether the child with Down syndrome was, using sign language or gestures or pictures or whatever, it seemed like there was a real desire to communicate, where in autism, it's a lot of times we got to pull it out of them. We have to really prompt them. And it just doesn't seem like the kids with dual diagnosis just aren't as persistent in wanting us to, to be able to communicate all the time. Not saying that they never do, but, and that also the difference too, I think, is that repetitive speech, or like the echolalia, where they're repeating what they've heard. And it's just not necessarily communicative, or they're saying things over and over and over again. I think those are also those red flags If you've got a kiddo with Down syndrome who is also, that you think, maybe that's more of the autism piece of it. Then there's the sensory stuff, right? Whether it's sensitivity or defensiveness. They often prefer the low sensory environments, don't want to touch certain textures, or maybe the difficulty with loud noises or crowds, or not liking to be touched. A lot of feeding issues with autism in terms of just not, having a super limited diet, not necessarily not being able to feed themselves, but that really limited diet that has to do with sensory stuff. I'm not going to taste a new food or whatever it is. And the tantrums, I don't even like the word tantrum, meltdowns that are really difficult to explain. Like, where did that come from? That looked like it was out of the blue. Chances are it could have a lot to do with their sensory environment, and they're just not, able to tell us that's what's going on, but they're often really difficult to soothe. So that, again, can be a red flag. The poor eye contact I kind of mentioned already, but a lot of times just not using the eye contact for a purpose of communication, or they might be focusing or might look at out of the peripheral vision instead of straightforward, or might focus on like your mouth or another part of you rather than, trying to give you eye contact. Delayed achievement, again, kiddos with Down syndrome, it might, take them longer to learn skills, but if they've got the dual diagnosis, it's going to be even longer to learn those skills. And then those mood, kind of issues that I talked about too. Obviously, the first thing you got to do is rule out any medical concerns, right? There's also more sleep issues with dual diagnoses. So in terms of evaluating for them, obviously, like I said, do all your medical screenings, the hearing, the vision, the thyroid, are they suddenly acting this way because they've got, earaches or headaches, or they're, not seeing or whatever. But then, the pediatricians should be giving the MChat to all children. And the MChat is just a 20-question questionnaire that all pediatricians are supposed to give all parents of children 16 to 30 months old. And I've heard from a lot of parents of kids with Down syndrome that their pediatrician didn't bother giving them that because, again, a lot of times we see the Down syndrome and we don't look further. So, but that MChat can really, really drive, just getting an evaluation done quicker for autism. And then there are different, autism questionnaires. The ADOS, the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, is really the only standardized test there is for evaluating for autism. And it's very play-based. There are you can use it with toddlers through adults, and it's really based on the amount of language. There's different modules that we can use, and we base it on how much language they have, which module we're going to use, and their age. But it's very play-based for the most part, and really looks at, the social, the communication, any kind of sensory or interfering behavior, that kind of thing. As long as looking at adaptive behavior, interviewing parents, teachers, therapists, especially those interviews should especially be asking questions about their social interaction with their peers. Because that's, again, where, kids with autism sometimes do fantastic when they're interacting with an adult, but not with their peers. Not with, or with kids much younger than them or kids much older than them, but their same age peers is where they tend to have the most difficulty. So, interviewing, all of that too, to kind of get through. So in terms of interventions, which I know is what, Linda mentioned, ABA therapy, definitely, parents report with kids with autism and dual diagnoses, tends to be the most helpful. And then the other therapies, speech and language therapy, PTOT, then school, and then family support kinds of things. So my kind of thought here is, if you're kind of on the fence about, maybe they've said, well, he could qualify for an autism diagnosis. And you're like, well, do I want to claim that? Do I want to accept that, and say, yes, he's dually diagnosed or not? Are you getting the services you need without it? Because a lot of times just getting the autism diagnosis, whether it's a dual diagnosis or just autism, opens the door for services. And so, even if it's kind of iffy, if they're willing to give it, I would take it unless you feel like they're getting the services that they need, Um, I have some resources in here, and I can definitely share this whole PowerPoint with you, Linda, if you want to, get it out, whatever. There's only literally a couple of books written on it. And the When Down Syndrome and Autism Intersect, that was written several years ago, but there is a second edition that just came out this year. So it's got some updated information. And then this Mother's Journey, Navigating Down Syndrome and Autism, by Teresa Understall. That's a newer one as well. There is a free online support through the Down Syndrome Autism Connection. I don't know if you have this or not, but I found this. So there's that, just to connect with families around the country. And then I've got these different ones. I know you know about some of them. Obviously, Down Syndrome Association. There's the Down Syndrome Autism Connection. The Down Syndrome Autism Connection of the Bay Area, that particular one, I had watched a webinar from a couple of people who had done, from there. But they actually, if you go on their website, they actually have a ton of a resource library of visuals. Like if you're wanting to use visual schedules or task analysis for different things or whatever, they've got a ton of them just already there that you can use. So I just thought that was a great library. That webinar that I mentioned, that's right there. There's some articles that I found too. I think I shared those with you before. So again, not a ton of resources, but there are some out there. In terms of like Easterseals services and things that we could offer if a child has a diagnosis, and actually the family navigation meeting is something that we can do even if you suspect that your child might have autism, but they don't have the diagnosis yet. We can still do a family navigation meeting. So basically, I meet with a family for about an hour and a half, ask a ton of questions about your child, kind of get to know them, and then I can connect you to services that would be appropriate for him and for your family. If you are suspecting that your child has autism, but they don't have that diagnosis yet, I can actually do some of those screening tools with you, score them, and give you an idea of like, yeah, let's point you in the direction of some of those autism clinics where you can get the evaluation done. So we can do that as well. But we can connect you with the services that Easterseals has to offer. And then if you're looking for something that we don't offer, I have tons and tons of resources, very specific connections that I can get you to get you, what you're looking for. So then the rest of so in terms of our parent training for families with kids with autism, so we have an intensive 2-week parent training program. This one also, you don't necessarily have to have an autism diagnosis. As long as your child has got some language challenges, some maybe behavioral challenges, social challenges, things that would kind of fall under the umbrella of, autism services. It's 2 weeks. It's Monday through Friday from 8 to 4 for 2 weeks straight. And both the parent and the child come. And what we do the very first day is we have the parents do a baseline session with their child. So we just, tell you, take some things you think will like, maybe some things they won't, keep them in a seat for 20 minutes. And we just kind of look at what is the interaction like? What are your child's communication skills, social skills, any behavioral, things that we might see? How do you interact with your child? How do they interact with you? And then we have parents really develop some objectives, some short-term goals based on their strengths and challenges in different developmental areas. And so what we do then is 3 times a day, first thing in the morning, right before lunch, and then right before they leave at the end of the day, a trainer will do a session with your child. And the sessions are based on your goals, on your priorities, unless we see something that's really like a prerequisite to the, to what you're looking for. And then we obviously might throw in some of our own too. If, we almost always work on coping strategies, appropriate coping strategies, that emotional regulation kind of piece. But we can work on just about anything, whether it's, communication, whether it's helping them learn to point or learn to speak, or asking a full sentence, or, asking questions, having a two-way conversation. So wherever they're at with that, we can work on communication. We can work on social skills, sharing, turn taking, playing appropriately with toys, whatever it may be. Sometimes, parents will ask us to work on some of the sensory kinds of things, like nail clipping, toothbrushing, hair brushing, some of those things that they really don't like because of that sensory feel. We can kind of work on some of those. So, and again, like I said, appropriate coping strategies, it could be just about anything that we're working on during those sessions. And the parents watch those sessions from a computer lab, and meet with the trainer a few minutes afterwards to kind of just talk about how it went. And then, so then in between those sessions, there are blocks of time where the parents are in workshops learning more about autism, communication, sensory integration, behavior development principles and strategies, visual strategies, positive interaction strategies, tons and tons of strategies. So then the second week looks just like the first, with the exception that instead of our trainers doing the sessions with the child, the parent does their sessions with their child. And we give you an earpiece that you put in your ear, and we actually coach you while you're working with your child. So we might, remind you, tell him how many more he has to do, or tell him he's doing a great job, or don't look at him right now, make him pick that up, whatever it is. We can kind of coach you while you're working with him. And then, so the first week kind of focuses on how is my child doing? What kind of progress is he making? What strategies are working for him? The second week, we change the focus onto the parents and have you actually watch each section back. We record every session that the parents do, and then they watch it back as soon as they've done it. So kind of having them look at, okay, what am I learning? What do I want to do more of, or maybe do less of when I'm interacting with my child? So we actually have them watch that. And the workshops continue throughout that second week as well. So the very last session is uncoached, and then we have you watch your baseline session and your last session back to back. So you can kind of see the progress that both you and your child have made over those 2 weeks. Most parents say it's pretty life-changing. It's pretty amazing. We do have a hybrid version of that where the first week is the same. The second week, instead of you coming to us for that full day every day, we come to your home for 2 hours each day, and you do your sessions with your child at home. So I'll tell you, as trainers, we all prefer the full 2 weeks, the regular one. But if you've got a kiddo who does great and behaves really well in the community, but when they get home, they lose it, that hybrid might be a really good option, because, then you're doing those sessions with them at home where, it really happens, so we still coach, you do your sessions there. We also have an in-home parent training program, and this you do have to have an autism diagnosis for. But if you live in St. Louis City, St. Louis County, we can do in-home training for free. We come out once a week, typically for a couple of hours, and we bring all that information that you would get at that 2-week training, all those workshop information, as well as talking about just issue-specific concerns that you have. If you have a really hard time taking your kiddo to the grocery store, we can go to the grocery store with you and see what that looks like. So then we can give you ideas, strategies to try, or maybe, bedtime routine is really hard. We can come then, or, whatever it is. Talk about potty training, or, whatever those really specific things that you're concerned about, we can focus on those. We have a 1-day introductory workshop on autism. We offer it every other month on a Saturday or Sunday from 9 to 3. And it just kind of gives you a really good understanding of the autism spectrum, as well as some basic strategies that tend to work well with kids on the spectrum. So it's really great. It's great for parents of newly diagnosed kids, or maybe if you're trying to figure out if my kid's on the spectrum. It's also really great for extended family members who like want to be supportive and want to help, but maybe don't know a lot about autism or the strategies, or the reasons behind the strategies, that kind of thing. We do have a parent support group that's, for parents of kids with autism. They meet virtually on Wednesday evenings. We have a sib shop for siblings. They meet twice a month on Monday evenings. It's a lot of fun, games and snacks, but also time to talk about whatever they want to talk about for their sibling. We always make them say something nice, but then they can talk about whatever else they need to. And make sure it's education based. So if they're complaining about, they do this, or why can't, or they're asking questions, why aren't they talking the way my other friends, siblings are talking, or whatever, we can explain that and help them understand what the autism, is for them. We do have an ABA clinic. It's an early childhood clinic. So before kindergarten, at our office, and that's all through insurance. And this is something too, I'll tell you, I said, if you can get services, if you can't get the services you're wanting without the autism diagnosis, and this is one of those, typically insurance companies are not going to pay for ABA unless you have an autism diagnosis. So ABA, for those of you that aren't familiar, is, one-on-one therapy. It's all based on the principle of behaviors happen for a reason. So if we can figure out what the reason is behind it, then we can do two things. One, we know what we need to teach them. So if they're doing something to escape or avoid something, well, number one, obviously we're going to ask, why are they trying to escape or avoid it? But two, we can teach them to ask for a break, like maybe, or ask if they can do it later, or give them the tools that they need so they don't have to feel like they have to run every time, or maybe they need to learn to ask for help. And then the other thing it tells us is what to do in the moment. So when they are doing inappropriate behavior, well, if they're doing it for escape, we're not going to let them totally out of it until they've done something appropriate to ask to get out of it, to ask for a break, to ask for, another minute or whatever. So ABA is all also based on positive interactions. So it's all positive reinforcement based. We do have some friendship skills groups as the kids get older, in 3rd through 5th grade, middle school, high school, adults. We can attend IEP meetings with you, 504 meetings with you at schools. We can do school observations. We can do in-services. I do a lot of in-services for teachers, for library staff, for museum staff, those kinds of things, people out in the community. We do have a drop-off respite program on Saturdays from 9 to 1, where parents can drop their kiddos off with us and know that they're safe and being, having some fun while they're getting a break. And then for older kiddos as well, the middle schoolers, high schoolers, young adults, we've got several different clubs and things that they can join as well. Yeah, I talked about that pretty much already. And then we do have, for any, and so all of that was for our autism services. For any adult with a developmental disability of any kind, we have adult day program. We've got, pre-employment, employment programs, supported living, independent living, those kinds of things as well.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. That was very informative. And I definitely appreciate you. I appreciate Easterseals allowing you to come and talk to us as well.